Hey y'all, just got back from the Dirty D, the good old Delta. Um, Been stuck on some Clearwater lakes lately for tournaments. Finally getting back to the Delta. Got July and August tournaments are both at the Delta. So gonna be stuck out there for a little bit. Might make a couple of trips up to Clear Lake. Maybe some others. We'll see. Um, let's get started with this. The weather starting out in the mid 50s with a high of the high 70s, low 80s. I didn't get out on the water until it was already probably in the 60s. And also the wind was 15 mile an hour, at least 10 at the lowest for the whole day, if not 20, but probably average about 15. So it was windy all day. Tide was outgoing to a low, and a pretty big outgoing. So that current was really ripping out terms. The pretty much where I decided to start was just do kind of my average milk run. My average milk run starts out in Potato. So I ran in Potato, picked one of those rock banks, and started covering down those rock banks. Baits I started to use was the underspin. This is a 3.8 Kitech in threadfin shad. I started to pick those up at first, and I was getting short struck on this. Did land a couple, but a lot of them were kind of more short strikes. I did try throwing the 3.3, and they still wouldn't go for it. They did actually prefer the 3.8. Throwing that on a Dobbins Champion DC 765 CB. I know it's a crankbait rod, but for these 3/0 flashy swimmers, they just keep them pinned for me. I'm not really slamming into them. I'm just kind of leaning on them, and they just seem to load up just fine on 20-pound fluoro, leader, and 30-pound braid. After I was running through this, getting short struck a bunch of times, I decided I needed to pick up something else, but stay in that same realm. So with that wind going on, my theory was this was just too subtle. I needed something that had a little bit more draw power, a little more thump to it. And that's when I picked up Chatterbait. This is the Z-Man Custom Chatterbait in Citrus Shad. And then I have a 2.8 Kitech on here, rigged upside down, right? That's right side up. This is upside down. If you rig it upside down, this tail and this blade match the same tempo. If you put it right side up, this one goes crazy and this one's just ticka ticka ticka, right? So if you flip it upside down, they match the same tempo. That even though that little 2.8 is small, it still gives a lot of bulk to this bait. And it still has that little tail action, which if you notice, does not stick that much outside the skirt. But I promise you, you can see it. It makes a difference because that skirt's flared up, right? Throwing that on a 7.2 medium heavy glass, the Zodius. This rod, and then again 20-pound fluoro with 30-pound braid. This combination has worked really well for me. It'll keep them pinned even when they're back there in the toolies and you can't quite wrestle them out of there. It'll keep it pinned as you can go in there and get them. So that's why I run this combo. As far as the Chatterbait, I guess this is a I color the blade in with Sharpie, if you didn't notice. Basically what I was focusing on was the weed lines, that weed edges. They weren't up there, even though that tide was a little bit higher at the time. They weren't really related to those toolies. They seemed to be ambushing from the weeds. I switched over from that rock island. I went to the rock bank, and I switched to a tule island. And I was picking them up kind of near the tules, kind of near weird weed clumps. But again, it was ambush points, right? Hard edges, something, a pinch point, something like that. And I just run that through there and they'd come up and eat it. After that, I decided maybe I needed to go back to the rock. And I have like a weed line area that I wanted to fish. So I tried fishing that, and I threw spinnerbaits, I threw square bills, I threw a couple other different baits. What I ended up picking up fish on was, again, back to the underspin and the chatterbait. Decided to leave that entire area because I was kind of fishing familiar waters. And, like I said, doing that milk run. Moved out to some other areas, some newer places I haven't taken that's on the way to like Tower Park area. Stopped along there a couple of times. Did not matter what I threw. I did try throwing frog in multiple different areas throughout the day. I couldn't get anything to go on the frog, but it potentially was probably not the right day for it. Realistically, not quite the right setup, but I did try it because you never know if frog has a big bite to it. Went to over by Tower Park area and started running through that. Again, throwing underspin and then throwing the chatterbait. What I did notice is they were pulled off into the weeds in the beginning. Well, as that weed, or as that tide lowered down more, they actually started picking on the solo tule clumps that were outside, right? So you got like your inside tule edge, and then you got a gap, and then you have a solo tule clump, and then there's another gap, and there's weeds. They were in that area around those tules. The most productive bait for the larger bites, the actual keeper sizes, was this chatterbait. So I basically picked up a really good pattern, caught a limit of fish off of it, plus on the chatterbait, between that and the underspin. And I wanted to do something different. I want to pick up something different, move around. That is when I picked up a square bill, and I started going to town on them. Unfortunately, none of them were large. Right now, if you want to fish that back alley, there is a ton of small fish if you want to get somebody in on it, a kid or somebody new, or just want to learn to crankbait and like get better with your accuracy and casting. Pick up a small square bill, and this is actually a Rick Clunn, I want to say it's Strike Pro or something. It says discontinued bait, but realistically, it's just a white with a green back, silent bait. Just something subtle that's inside there. Again, was small, so I wanted to figure out if I could. I was already catching the larger fish in that same area on the chatterbait. What else can work, right? So I picked up this, which is the Jabberjaw in the red. And I was throwing through there again with small fish. I could not find a bigger bite. The best consistent bite for the smaller ones was these two, was either that white or this red. Jabberjaw again is subtle. It has like a little knock to it, but not a lot, right? Like it's a quiet knock, and then it has this blade, right? Like a chatterbait that wiggles back and forth. And I'm throwing that on a Dobyns Caden 7-1 4-power. So that, they call it a heavy action, but it's not really heavy action. It's more of a moderate medium to me. Great rod for throwing square bills, smaller square bills, smaller cranks. I've really come to like this rod. I actually bought it as a backup chatterbait rod for being able to rough them out of the toolies. Like I was saying, that my Zodius you can't quite rough them out. With this Caden, you can pull them out a little bit harder, a little bit easier. But it's turned out to be a really, really good crankbait rod. Basically, that's about most of my day. Like I said, most of the bigger fish came on that chatterbait. Next was the underspin, and there was a ton of fish on square bill. And to be honest with you, it didn't really matter color. It's more location, and you just want to stay in between that tule and the weeds and that back little alley, and they were just inside there. You'll see in the background clips there, it's just fish after fish of dinks after dinks. That's pretty much it. If you have any questions, you can ask them down below. You can always hit me up on Instagram. It's Straight Hooked Fishing. Other than that, I think that's it. So until next time, I hope you get them. Can we take a moment to notice the chunk factor of this fish? Like, it is not even the length of my hand, but it's almost the width of my hand. Jeesh.